Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Applied aspects of the neuromuscular junction and neuromuscular blockers. So, this is the structure of the neuromuscular junction, where we have the presynaptic nerve terminal, the amyelinated axon ending as a presynaptic knob. This presynaptic nerve terminal has got the vesicles with the neurotransmitter, which is acetylcholine, and there are presence of voltage gated calcium channels in the presynaptic nerve terminal, and presence of numerous mitochondria for provision of ATP for the process of exocytosis and release of neurotransmitters. And we have the post-junctional folds. These post-junctional folds are nothing but the modifications of the sarcolemma or the muscle membrane, which is especially present only at the neuromuscular junction. And in the post-junctional folds, we have the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, which will bind the acetylcholine molecules which are released from the exocytosis of the vesicles. So, this receptor itself functions as a ligand gated ion channel, where the sodium enters through these channels, and also we have the presence of voltage gated sodium channels on either side of the sarcolemma. And in between the presynaptic nerve terminal and the post junctional membrane, we have the synaptic cleft or the space in between the two structures, where there is a presence of acetylcholinesterase enzyme for the process of termination of neuromuscular transmission. So, the steps of neuromuscular transmission is by the first arrival of the action potential in this nerve terminal. This arrival of action potential will trigger the entry of calcium ions through the voltage gated calcium channels. So, these calcium ions as well as ATP are required for the process of exocytosis of the vesicle. So, on entry of calcium ions, there is exocytosis of the vesicles and release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. So, this acetylcholine molecules binds with the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors present on the post-junctional folds. So, this binding will trigger the entry of sodium ions into the sarcolemma. This entry of sodium ions will cause depolarization in the sarcolemma on generation of a local potential called as end plate potential. This end plate potential will be followed by the action potential because of excess of sodium ions through the voltage gated sodium channels. So, once action potential is generated in the muscle, it further leads on to the contraction of the muscle. Once the neuromuscular transmission process is over, the transmission process is stopped by means of the degradation of acetylcholine molecules, the excess acetylcholine molecules which are present in the synaptic cleft by means of the acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So, this is how the process of neuromuscular transmission happens. So, this neuromuscular transmission can be blocked by means of various drugs, poisons, toxins, etc. And to block the transmission, the blockage can be happening at any of the levels, such as one is a presynaptic blockade, where either the process of calcium entry or the exocytosis of the vesicle can be blocked, so that there is no release of neurotransmitter for the process, or the blockade can be at the level of the postsynaptic level, where the post-junctional folds which has got the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, so this can be blocked, or the voltage gated sodium channels can go for inactivation, so that the further process of transmission cannot happen, or the blockage can be at the level of the synaptic cleft, where some inhibition of acetylcholinesterase enzyme also can either prevent the transmission of the impulses from the nerve membrane to the muscle membrane. Likewise, the neuromuscular blockers can be classified into three types. One, acting at the presynaptic level, toxins like botulinum toxin, tetanus toxin and drugs like hemicoline or some of the agents which can act at the presynaptic level and can cause blockade of transmission. And another is at the postsynaptic level. The postsynaptic blockade again can be classified into two types: competitive or non-depolarizing blockers, non-competitive or depolarizing blockers. So under competitive or non-depolarizing blockers, a poison, very commonly known potent poison called as curare, and other drugs like galamine, D-tuberculorin, pancuronium, rocuronium, vicuronium, atracurium, cisatracurium and mivacurium. These are latest drugs which can act at the as a non-depolarizing blocker and can block the transmission of impulses. And another is non-competitive or depolarizing blockers, a very commonly used muscle relaxant called as succinylcholine, suxamethonium, and a toxin called as alpha bungarotoxin acts at this level. And some agents which can act at the synaptic level can be inhibitors of acetylcholinesterase enzyme, neostigmine and physostigmine, which are reversible acetylcholinesterase enzyme inhibitors, and organophosphorus compounds which can act as irreversible inhibitors like parathion, malathion, nerve gases can act as irreversible inhibitors of acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So this neuromuscular blockers, though it is present in many plants as toxins, and some snake venom can produce a neurotoxin which can block the neuromuscular transmission process, but some of the agents can be used as drugs as well. And these drugs are especially required during muscle relaxation for surgery. So any surgical process does not involve only the use of analgesics which are going to cause pain relief, but also muscle relaxation is required. So though the patient is going to be having analgesia, stimulation of a muscle can produce a reflex response of contraction. So to prevent that, the neuromuscular blockers can be used as muscle relaxants for proper surgical procedures. And also a short dose of neuromuscular blockers can be used especially during short anesthetic procedures and also for endotracheal intubation. So this process requires the relaxation of the pharyngeal muscles. A short dose of muscle relaxant is given to cause muscle paralysis, and which will facilitate easier endotracheal intubation. And also it is used in muscle hyperactive states where there is a hyperactivity of the muscle. So when a neuromuscular blocker is given as an injection to these areas, it can reduce the spasticity of the muscle, thereby causing muscle relaxation and treatment of the condition. Botulinum toxin. Botulinum toxin is a toxin which is synthesized from a anaerobic bacteria called as Clostridium botulinum. So this bacteria can produce a neurotoxin which at a concentration of 2 to 3 micrograms can be lethal to the human beings. There are about 7 neurotoxins which are developed produced by this Clostridium botulinum bacteria. Botulinum toxins A, B, C1, D, E, F and G. Out of this, the neurotoxins A, B and E are toxic to the human beings, whereas other toxins are mainly toxic to the animals. And the main mechanism of action of botulinum toxin is by blocking the release of acetylcholine molecules. So this is the structure of the presynaptic knob, where we have the vesicle loaded with the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and this is the presynaptic nerve membrane. So for the process of exocytosis, there are two main proteins which are involved, that is a VSNAP protein which is associated with the vesicle membrane called as synaptobrevin, and TSNAP protein which is associated with the presynaptic membrane called as syntaxin and SNAP25. So this botulinum toxin A and E classically inhibit this TSNAP protein which is syntaxin and SNAP25, and the botulinum toxin B classically inhibits the VSNAP protein which is synaptobrevin. So when these two proteins are blocked, there is no process of exocytosis and the vesicle exocytosis is getting stopped. Because of that, there is no release of acetylcholine molecules at the neuromuscular junction. Because of that, it leads to blockage of the neuromuscular transmission, leading on to flaccid paralysis. Flaccid paralysis is where the tone of the muscle reduces and goes for weakness and paralysis. Botulinum toxin is a very common contaminant in food which are stored in room temperature for more than 16 hours, and also the spores of the bacteria are all present in the environment in the soil as well. So when the person is infected with this toxin, The clinical features are usually associated with the central nervous system as well as the autonomic nervous system, where it produces dry mouth, diplopia or the double vision, drooping of eyelids called as ptosis, dysarthria as difficulty in articulation, dysphonia as difficulty in phonation, dysphagia difficulty in swallowing, and leading on to vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain. Finally, the muscle weakness becomes severe. When the muscle weakness is extended to the respiratory muscles, it can cause respiratory paralysis and death. So, this botulinum toxin usually when it is infecting a patient, the treatment is supportive treatment followed by mechanical ventilation required if there is a respiratory paralysis, but the recovery rate of these patients is usually less than 20%, and there is no proper vaccine which is developed till date for prevention of this botulism, and also this botulinum toxin is being used as a lethal bioterrorism weapon also. One important feature of this botulinum toxin is the preparation of a drug called as Botox, which is a isolated neurotoxin from the same bacteria, but it is diluted several times and it is becoming non-lethal when it is given as an injection. So, that dose is actually used for treatment of some condition called as achalasia cardia, where there is hyperactivity or increased tone in the lower esophageal sphincter. This is the esophagus and the stomach. In the lower esophageal sphincter goes for hyperactivity. So, this Botox injection can be given as a treatment by injection into these muscles, thereby the hyperactive sphincters are, the tone of the sphincters is reduced and causing relaxation. So, when the tone is hyperactive, the food and water cannot properly enter into the stomach and it gets accumulated in the esophagus. So, Botox injection can be used as one of the treatment for relieving this hypertonic sphincters. Other conditions like treatment of facial wrinkles, this Botox injection can be administered locally, and also it can be used as a treatment for blepharospasm, which is spasm of the eyelid muscles. Tetanus toxin. Tetanus toxin is again synthesized by a bacteria called as Clostridium tetani, and this is also a type of neurotoxin. The name of the neurotoxin is tetanospasmin. So, this is again the presynaptic nerve terminal and the postjunctional force. So, this tetanospasmin binds to the presynaptic nerve terminal. The tetanospasmin then it enters into the presynaptic nerve terminal and ascends via the axon in a retrograde transport manner, and it reaches the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. So, in the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord, the tetanospasmin binds to the ganglioside terminals of the inhibitory interneurons present in the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. So, on binding to the inhibitory interneurons, this toxin inhibits those inhibitory interneurons, and the actual function of inhibitory interneurons is to control the activity of the alpha motor neurons of the spinal cord. So, because of inhibition of the inhibitory interneurons, the alpha motor neurons becomes hyper excited. Therefore, the motor neuron activity cannot be inhibited by this inhibitory interneurons, leading to hyperactivity of the muscles, leading on to a state of spastic paralysis. Hyperactivity of the neurons, activity of the muscles, leading to spastic paralysis. Curare is a poison which is isolated from a plant genus called as Strychnos, and this is a competitive inhibitor of acetylcholine molecules. So, acetylcholine molecule generally should bind to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, but in the presence of curare, curare has got more affinity for the acetylcholine receptors. So, therefore, they go and bind to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, thereby blocking these receptors. The blockage of receptors leads to no generation of end plate potential. So, no action potential in the muscle, leading to muscle paralysis. This curare is a commonly used arrowhead poison for hunting animals in natives of South America, and the hunted animals can be eaten as flesh. Since the toxin is not absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract, usually it do not affect the human beings. And an active ingredient which can be used as a drug which is synthesized from the curare is D-tubercularine. This drug when it is administered as a IV during anesthesia intravenously, this can cause similar mechanism of action and can be used as a muscle relaxant during surgery. And also there are other drugs like pancuronium. Pancuronium is 5 times more potent than D-tuberculin, and since pancuronium is more specific for the neuromuscular junction of the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors than other drugs like D-tuberculin. So, pancuronium, atracurium, mivacurium, cisatracurium are newer generation of drugs which has got more specificity for this nicotinic acetylcholine receptors with less side effects, and which are the drugs which can be commonly used as muscle relaxant during surgery. Succinylcholine is a very commonly used drug during muscle relaxation for surgery, and this is a very short acting drug. Once administered, it produces muscle relaxation within 2 to 4 minutes, and the relaxation continues for 10 minutes, and wherever there is a short dose of muscle relaxation required like endotracheal intubation, a short surgical procedure, this succinylcholine is the drug of choice. So, succinylcholine by mechanism of action resembles the acetylcholine. It has got the same chemical nature and it resembles the action of acetylcholine. So, in the presence of succinylcholine, the succinylcholine preferably goes and binds to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor because of its more affinity. Because of its binding, the receptor opens because it itself is a ligand gated ion channel, and succinylcholine behaves like acetylcholine molecule, thereby opening the ligand gated ion channels, entry of sodium ions. This entry of sodium ions will cause further generation of end plate potential, and this end plate potential will further open the voltage gated sodium channel, leading on to continuous entry of sodium ions, leading on to action potential. So, initially it produces a muscle contraction in the muscle, but acetylcholine can be destroyed. The excess amount of acetylcholine usually is destroyed by the acetylcholinesterase enzyme which is present in the synaptic cleft, but succinylcholine cannot be destroyed by the acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So, because of that, excess succinylcholine which is available at the neuromuscular junction keeps on binding to the acetylcholine receptors, thereby keeps on opening the ligand gated ion channels as well as the voltage gated ion channels. There is continuous entry of sodium ions and there is a continuous depolarization. So, because of the continuous depolarization, this voltage gated sodium channels can go for inactivation. So, once this gets inactivated, there is no further entry of sodium ions, therefore leading on to the depolarization blockade. So, once the depolarization blockade happens, there is no further process of neuromuscular transmission and the muscle will go for paralysis. So, initially there is a increase in contraction, further leading on to the paralysis of the muscle, and this is how the depolarizing blockers work. So, succinylcholine is a type of depolarization blocker. Regarding the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors can be reversible inhibitors or irreversible inhibitors. Reversible inhibitors are usually drugs like neostigmine and pyridostigmine, and irreversible inhibitors are usually organophosphorus compounds like parathion, malathion, nerve gases, toxins from the snake bites. All these things can be irreversible acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So, the acetylcholine molecules which are binding to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, so after its mechanism of action is destroyed by the acetylcholinesterase enzyme. But these drugs neostigmine and physostigmine can actually inhibit this acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So, because of that, the remaining acetylcholine molecules are not destroyed and there are more time available for the action of acetylcholine molecules. So, because of availability of more amount of acetylcholine molecules, there is a more opening of sodium channels, more entry of sodium ions, again leading on to a continuous depolarization, leading on to a further depolarization blockade. So, this is what happens with the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. Some clinical conditions which are associated with the neuromuscular transmission blockade are mainly of two things. One is myasthenia gravis, where there are antibodies produced against the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Another condition is the Lambert-Eaton syndrome, where there are antibodies to the voltage gated calcium channels. Myasthenia gravis, from the name it sounds like myo means muscle, asthenia is weakness. So, this is a condition which is associated with the muscle weakness. If untreated, it can be a fatal condition as well. So, here in the post junctional folds where we have the receptors and the acetylcholine molecules, Instead of the acetylcholine molecules, the acetylcholine receptor antibodies, because they are produced, it is an autoimmune condition, the acetylcholine receptor antibodies will come and bind to these receptors. Hence, acetylcholine molecules cannot be binding to these receptors. Therefore, there is no generation of end plate potential, no action potential, and there is no contraction of the muscles, thereby leading on to the muscle weakness. As the condition is progressing in the patient, there are many changes which can happen at the neuromuscular junction. So, one is, this is a normal junction where there is a presynaptic nerve terminal and the postjunctional folds. Here in myasthenia gravis patients, we can see there is a increase in the space of the synaptic cleft, and there is smoothening of the postjunctional folds, and there will be loss of receptors because of endocytosis of the acetylcholine receptor present at the postjunctional folds, and the number of receptors also is reducing when compared to a normal junction. And in this condition, there is always a decremental response to repetitive nerve stimulation. That is, here the muscle weakness progresses as the muscle is being used for excessive time. For example, in normal conditions, repetitive nerve stimulation leads to generation of action potential in the muscles, whereas in myasthenia gravis patients, on repetitive nerve stimulation, initially there will be action potentials, but later the amplitude of the miniature end plate potential as well as the action potential will be reducing, generation of number of action potentials will be reducing, because initially the minimal availability of receptors are being utilized for the process of neuromuscular transmission process. Later, due to continuous stimulation, there is exhaustion of these receptors and also exhaustion of the available acetylcholine molecules because of the acetylcholinesterase enzyme present in the synaptic cleft. Because of that, the response reduces. Clinical features in myasthenia gravis patient, usually this happens in younger females and older males, and it affects more females when compared to males in a ratio of 3:2. The classical feature will be drooping of eyelids or ptosis. So, the patients comes to the doctor with complaints of drooping of eyelids, and the classical complaint will be, it will be better, it improves after sleeping. So, once they get up in the morning, there will not be any drooping of eyelids, but as the day progresses towards the evening, the drooping increases, and this is again because of the same mechanism, because of repeated muscle actions, it goes for a decremental response. And there will be diplopia or double vision, dysphagia or difficulty in swallowing. The limb muscles also can be affected, and as the condition progresses and it becomes severe, respiratory muscles can be affected, which can lead to paralysis and death of the person. 10 to 15% of the conditions can be associated with a tumor of thymus gland called as thymoma. So, here the helper T cells which are synthesized from the thymus gland can cross react with the thymic proteins and act against this acetylcholine receptors. So, because of that, there will be enlargement of the thymus gland. So, removal of thymus gland called thymectomy can help in relieving this condition. Diagnosis is usually done by means of clinical features and sleep test, where the patient will be asked to sleep for some time. So, once they get up, the drooping of eyelids will improve, the ptosis improves. That means it can be a diagnosis of myasthenia gravis. And a test called as edrophonium test, this drug blocks the acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So, it makes the acetylcholine available for longer time. The condition, the weakness improves. So, that can be used as a confirmatory test for diagnosis of myasthenia gravis. And of course, demonstration of serum antibodies to the acetylcholine receptors will be a confirmatory diagnosis for diagnosis of myasthenia gravis. Treatment is usually by means of administration of acetylcholinesterase enzyme inhibitors like neostigmine, physostigmine. This drugs makes the acetylcholine molecules available for a little longer time. Therefore, the neuromuscular transmission can happen with the minimal availability of the receptors, leading on to improving the muscle weakness. So, initially it is being treated with drugs, and also because this is an autoimmune condition, immunosuppressive drugs like prednisolone, azathioprine can be used, IV immunoglobulins can be used as a treatment, and plasmapheresis, where the plasma of the patient is exchanged, treated and reinfused into the same patient, or a fresh plasma can be given. And of course, thymectomy. So, even in the absence of thymoma, there are theories which have proved that still the patients can go for reduction in the severity of the condition if a thymectomy is done in those patients. Lambert-Eaton syndrome is again an autoimmune condition where the autoantibodies are produced against the voltage gated calcium channels present in the presynaptic membrane. And in this condition, it is opposite of the myasthenia gravis where there is an incremental response to repetitive muscle stimulation. So, here in normal patient, repeated stimulation will lead to repeated generation of action potentials and contraction. In Lambert-Eaton syndrome, initial stimulation will have a lesser response. On repeated stimulation, it leads to the increase in the response. So, here the patients will complain of morning the muscle weakness is more, but as the day progresses the muscle weakness improves. So, this might be due to the increased amount of synthesis of voltage gated calcium channels available at the presynaptic nerve terminal, which can facilitate more entry of calcium ions, thereby leading on to improving the muscle transmission, neuromuscular transmission, and improving the muscle weakness. So, the presentation will be opposite to the myasthenia gravis patient, and because the mechanism of action involved is also different in this condition. And it mainly affects the proximal muscles of the lower limb, leading to waddling type of gait, and 40% of the condition is associated with small cell carcinoma of the lung and also other carcinomatous conditions, and treatment like myasthenia gravis with prednisolone, IV immunoglobulins and plasmapheresis.